My name's Todd Finkel. I'm the Pigott Professor of Entrepreneurship here at Gonzaga. I came here in 2010 to create entrepreneurship programs. And now anybody at the university here can take an entrepreneurship class. And we've done a good job of that. And we have the Hogan program. We have our program. We have graduate programs in entrepreneurship. And for a school our size, we do really well when it comes to entrepreneurship. So, and we have great students and great faculty, and we have an advisory board of 70 people, and a lot of them are here tonight. And I want to thank all of you for being on our board, for helping out our students and people in our program. I'm not going to take very much time, but we have our speaker tonight, Larry Simkins. Thank you for coming tonight, Larry. And I want to definitely thank Mark Pigott, who endowed my chair, and we wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for Mark Pigott and his family. And so a shout out to Mark Pigott. I want to thank our provost is here tonight, Sasha Kopp. Did I say that right? Good. Thanks for coming. And our dean is here as well. I don't know where Ken is at, but there he is. He's hiding. Thanks for everything that you do, Ken, and for building up our program here within the School of Business. And now we have several national ranked programs in the School of Business under Ken's leadership. I also want to thank AJ Hawk, Maureen Duclos, Dorothy Greenmeyer, and Jane Hessian. These are all people that help our School of Business run. Without them, we wouldn't be able to function properly. And finally, I want to recognize somebody who's a student of mine. Dylan, if you wouldn't mind standing up. This is Dylan Mustache. Did I say that right? Okay. So Dylan is 22 years old, and he is getting a degree in entrepreneurship, and I think MIS is his other concentration. He sold a business last year, and I'm not going to embarrass him by how much it is, but he can retire, and he's 22 years old. I immediately put him on my advisory board. He is the only student I've ever had where I put on my advisory board while he was still in school. So Dylan is a special kid. Thank you. And now I want to introduce Joe Poss, who's going to introduce Larry Simkins. The thing about Joe, when I came here in 2010, one thing about Joe that I noticed is he always has a smile on his face. And he's got a smile on his face right now. And he's going to have a smile on his face when he's up here. Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Finkel. I'm smiling, Todd, but I won't tell you what I'm thinking, right? Good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Poss. I'm an alumnus of Gonzaga, but I currently serve as the university's Vice President for Advancement. I'm very honored to be here. Most specifically, I'm here on behalf of Dr. McCullough, who regrettably can't be here tonight because he's flying back to Spokane from somewhere in the continental United States. He extends his regrets, Larry, to you certainly, but everyone else who's gathered here. And he has asked me to extend some messaging to everyone. Larry, I get to introduce you here in just a minute. I promise we won't go too long. Dr. McCullough asked me first to start with a message of gratitude for everyone to be here tonight in the spirit of Jesuit education, continual learning, always in the pursuit of knowing more. And specifically, he asked me to extend gratitude to Dean Anderson and Dr. Finkel for organizing and hosting all of this on behalf of Mark and Cindy Pigott. As Dr. Finkel mentioned, Mark and Cindy created the Pigott Professor in Entrepreneurship, which allowed us to recruit and retain Dr. Finkel here at GU and to get to enjoy his truly infectious teaching pursuits. He's a phenomenal professor and someone we know our students have come to love and very much respect. Mark and Cindy's generosity has not only created tonight's lecture series, but their commitment to the unique way in which we deliver Jesuit education here at Gonzaga has also motivated them to create experiences that you're also familiar with here on campus. The PACCAR Center is here because of their generosity. They also support the art department, the Jump Museum, the Modern Languages Department, as well as numerous scholarships across Gonzaga. So would you all please join me in thanking the Pigott family for their support? Dr. McCullough also asked me to introduce a special member of his leadership team. Dr. Finkel mentioned this individual already, but I would like to take a second because I know not everyone has been able to meet our new provost, Dr. Sasha Kopp. So Sasha, once again, we're going to ask you to raise your hand so we can all see and not acknowledge you. Dr. Kopp started at GU officially early in June, but unofficially he hit the ground running the day he accepted the job and has been on the job in the pursuit of helping us advance Jesuit education and the unique Gonzaga experience that we're all so proud of here. Prior to serving in this role at GU, Sasha served as the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Among many things we can say about Dr. Kopp, okay, I won't say. Most importantly, he's a leading voice in advocating for the important role of liberal arts education and how it is shaping our world. We are incredibly proud to have him leading at GU and helping to shape the future of our great university. So Dr. Kopp, thank you again for being here. I also want to acknowledge Chris Standiford, our Director of Athletics, who's a member of Dr. McCullough's leadership team. Chris, thank you for being here. Chris, right there. Thank you. Larry, word got out about you coming and speaking among your fellow members of the Board of Trustees, and several of them have joined us here this evening. So Mary Hirsch, thank you, Mary, for being here. Kevin McQuilkin, where are you, Kevin? Did we lose you? Oh, there you are. Also an executive in residence here at the university. And Chris Snow, a fellow trustee who's on her way to be here. I'd also like to thank members of our Board of Regents for joining this evening. Bob McCambridge. Bob, have I seen you yet? He's coming in from Seattle. And Christy Meyer from Vista Corp and Vista Foundation. Christy, thank you for being here. Other members of the board are aware that you're here, but they've asked for the recording. So I think you now can evaluate the ones you think highly of the most. They're the ones that are here. And to special friendships, I'd like to thank a special friend of the university and a friend of the Simkins family who's joined us tonight, Terry Payne. Terry, I think I saw you, or maybe he had to. Terry, thank you. Yes, please. Terry, Dr. McCullough asked us to thank you for being here and so grateful for the leadership development that you have sponsored and made sure all students have access to on our campus now for several decades. So thank you. So now to our esteemed speaker. Larry Simkins recently retired after serving as president and CEO for 21 years of the Washington Companies, an international group of privately owned companies focusing on the areas of rail and marine transportation, mining, environmental construction, heavy equipment sales, and aviation products. He is a member of the Board of Trustees for Gonzaga University and the Boy Scouts of America's Montana Council. He serves as director of Atlas Corp of London, England, a leading global asset management company focused on maritime sector, energy sector, and other infrastructure verticals. He's also a former director of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and has been awarded the Distinguished Eagle Scout. A graduate of the University of Montana with a degree in accounting, Larry earned his certification as a public accountant in 1983. Together with his wife, Kara, he is the proud parent of 2 Gonzaga graduates. Taylor, where are you, Taylor? I'm going to call you out. Taylor, there you go, class of 2015. Thank you for being here. And Morgan, class of 2017. The Simkins family has been an important part of Gonzaga, of the Gonzaga family, both philanthropically and as exemplars of the values, humility, generosity, belonging, integrity, and creativity. These values are championed here in the School of Business Administration, and they are championed across our entire campus. Larry's leadership and entrepreneurial acumen have been critical to the success of the organizations of which he has been a part of, as well as the communities he and the Simkins family have committed to serve, Gonzaga very much included. So on behalf of Dr. McCullough and Dr. Finkel and Dean Anderson, I'm grateful and honored to welcome for all of you, the 2023 Pigott Lecturer, Larry Simkins. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Joe. That was very nice. And I would like to also thank all the people that you listed for being here. So thank you. It really is an honor to be here for the Pigott Lecture. It's something that when Joe and Dean Anderson talked to me in August about this event, That was a long time ago, and this is harder than you think. And they said, what would you like to talk about? Or I asked them what they'd like me to talk about, and they said, well, just talk about your career. Well, I don't really talk about myself much. I've talked quite a bit, but it's always been about the Washington companies. It's been about the economy. It's been about deals that we've done, and I've done a handful of weddings in there too. But rarely do I get the opportunity to talk about myself. So this is rare for me. But what I didn't realize until about 2 weeks ago is what a gift they gave me. I realized it's the 40th anniversary of when I graduated from college. And so in a way, I'm in the exact same seat as a lot of you are right now, 40 years ago. And it caused me to reflect back and say, what was that like? And what did that look like? And what did it feel like? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But then to be in a point right now where I'm retired, I'm in the same place that you guys are. You know, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? What does the future have to hold for me? Those are all things that I'm contemplating and thinking about at the same time that you're thinking about it as well. I figured out really quickly that when you're sitting on a chairlift and somebody says, what do you do for a living? And I say retired, the conversation stops right there. So I've thought about lying to them, telling them that I'm Larry Dutton from the Yellowstone Ranch. We'll see how that goes, but we'll kind of figure that out a little bit. But in this moment of transitioning, it also dawned on me that, I mean, there's a Jesuit value that you guys talk about a lot, and that is in discernment. And so I'm in a moment of discernment of my own that's not dissimilar to where you're at. Am I scared? Yeah, I'm scared. I don't quite know what the future holds and what I should do, what's out there, in a similar point to where you are. And so what I'd like to do tonight is do two things. We'll talk a little bit about how I got to be CEO. 40 years ago, I didn't think that I was going to be CEO of an international company. That was the farthest thing from my mind. And so we'll talk about kind of some of the things that happened along the way to get to there. And then the second part, we'll just talk about the entrepreneurship part of it. I'm going to talk about 5 different examples. I'm not going to talk about the company. What I want to talk about is, what was it about that opportunity that nobody else saw, that the Washington company saw? Because everybody stepped over every one of these and didn't see them. And so giving you some insight on that, and then we'll have some question and answer after that. Before that, I want to thank a lot of people, but Dr. Finkel put me in touch with a couple of people, Kelly Shea, and I don't know if Kelly made it tonight, but I had coffee with her this morning. Oh, she did. Great. Thank you. So having a discussion with Kelly, it was great on understanding where we're at coming out of COVID. And she talked about meeting the students where they are. And so that's what I'm hoping to do tonight, is meet you where you are. And then Nick McLean, you know, candidly told me about, you know, the fact that in the entrepreneurship, that a lot of the things that are going on in people's mind is, what's the next Uber? That's what entrepreneurship started. You know, how do I come up with an idea? Where is that idea, and how come I can't figure out where it's at? And so what I want to do tonight is talk to you about a little bit more traditional businesses and the opportunities that exist in there that are as exciting as Uber. The other thing is, I watched the episode in The Office last weekend where Michael Scott is giving the speech to the college class. So I thought I'd watch that as well. And I'm not going to take anybody's book and rip it up. So if you guys have seen that, I won't do any of that. But then the best advice I got is, for God's sake, don't be boring. So I've been really incredibly fortunate to work on a lot of really cool stuff. So I brought some pictures for you tonight, and we'll see some of the pictures that I've got. But before we get started, the CEO of international company for 21 years, I'm sure everybody's got a picture in their mind of what that is and what that means. I don't want to hear what you're thinking, but what I'd love to hear to start is just in your mind, what one thing, or what was it that would cause somebody like me to lose sleep? What was the thing that I would go to bed worrying about at night, being the CEO of a company like that? Anybody? We'll make a note and I'll come back to it. People? What else? Yeah. Yep. What else? Funding, yep. Anything else? What's that? What you don't, yep. Okay. We're going to come back to that. And after we hear about what I did and where I was at, we'll talk about that. The other thing, one of the ground rules for tonight is I'm going to use the B word, and do not get intimidated by it. There's a lot of these businesses with billions of dollars at stake. What I talk about, it's the same whether it's $1 or $100 or $1 billion. Everything I'm talking about is relevant for what everybody's doing here. So don't get intimidated by the B word. I'm only using it for context. So the title for tonight is The Perfect Job and the Fear of Failure. And as I think about students in the room, I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety for next steps. What is the perfect job? And what does it look like? How do I get there? How do I know when I'm there? And I'm sure you've heard a lot of this from teachers and everybody else is, that word passion. And so when we talk about all those, we'll talk about them in the context of how I got there and what ended up happening when I was there. But how did I pick the topic? I had a million things I could have talked about tonight. And it was interesting. I had lunch. I was fortunate at lunch to sit next to Dr. Carolyn Cunningham. She's a professor of communication leadership here in December. And she said, there are so many students worried about the perfect job, especially coming out of COVID, and the anxiety associated with that. And that was the moment that I figured out that this was probably the right topic for tonight. And so let me go into the slides here. Oh, Jared. Maybe not. Let's see if this will work. There we go. We talked about this, the winding road to CEO, 5 examples of entrepreneurship, and in the lesson. So who is Dennis Washington? So I worked for Dennis Washington for 21 years as a CEO. Dennis started out in 1964. What he did was started a construction company with $30,000. And today the family is worth about $10 billion. It's an incredibly interesting story. And, a lot of the time what I figured out is when I was CEO and when I had the opportunity to speak like this, what most people want to know is what's Dennis's secret? I mean, what is there? What is there something that I can buy online that'll allow me to be as successful as he is? And that's never been the case. What we're going to talk about tonight is people, incentives, hard work. Those are the types of things that I think come out when we talk about it. It was interesting. I first became aware of the Pigott series in 2014 when I was approached to see if Dennis Washington would speak here. And so unfortunately you get second string for tonight, but it reminded me of when I started as president. I got a call from the local, the Missoula chapter of CPAs, and being a CPA, they took me through that they have a lunch series, and they were looking for a speaker for the lunch series, and they went through everything, and my chest was starting to puff out. I thought, I'm already thinking of topics, and they got to the punchline and said, you think Dennis Washington can come to our lunch and talk to us? So that's what you get. So to go back, let's see, where was I? Whoops. Getting ahead of myself here. So let's talk about the winding road to CEO. These are all of the different companies, and I would never even think of talking about this other than kind of where we're at with the anxiety of doing things. So I graduated 40 years ago. I was born in Helena. Neither of my parents went to college. And if you think about 1983, the unemployment rate was double what it was today. Mortgage rates were 13%, and that was down from 17.5% for mortgage rates. There were 8 major accounting firms. Now there's only 4, but they're made. So being a CPA coming out of the University of Montana, which is one of the top accounting schools in the United States, they only selected a handful of people. And so I was incredibly disappointed that there was an opportunity that I thought after I put in all the work there. There was anxiety about everything. the headlines that you guys are reading today is similar to what I was looking at when I came out of school. Fortunately, my dad worked for the Federal Reserve Bank, and that was the only way I got an interview. And so I became a Federal Reserve Bank examiner. And I was incredibly disappointed that that's the path that it led to, but it was a job and it was great. I ended up being there for 5 years, and it was just an incredible experience. But the travel, I was on the road. The last year I was there, I was on the road 42 weeks out of the year. So it was one of those that I had to change. I got a job at the Washington companies and Washington corporations. And they had just had an embezzlement. They had, in the construction company, somebody had stole $300,000 in tires. They had set up a company, were running the tires through it. And so they needed an internal auditor. So I was hired to be the first internal auditor. They didn't have a program. They didn't have anything. It wasn't ready to go. And so I showed up, and that was my first job at the Washington companies. I didn't do any internal auditing. What happened is they were buying companies and I was on the road again, being the one to integrate the company. And an opportunity came up for a small company called Envirocon, which was a startup, and they were having troubles. And so I was able to be the controller of the startup environmental company, which now is a nationwide environmental company that was started. That was one of those, and what we're going to talk about here, and a little bit of the theme going through it, is that, some of these have been horrible situations that I got myself into. And what had ended up happening is I learned more than you can imagine from that. So when they replaced the controller that was in there, they kept him, and he reported to me rather than reporting to the president. So we all know how that worked, and it didn't work very well. But one of the things that happened is, I'll never forget, the CEO was on a raft trip and was unavailable. We were putting in a huge bid, and something had changed at the last minute, and he had, quote, put me in charge. And so we were all sitting around a speakerphone, and I had to make a decision. And it was the first time, everybody in the company's looking at me, and I had to make a decision. And made the decision, and it ended up being the wrong decision. But you know what? Sun came up the next morning, everything worked, and it was fine. But I learned a lot from being decisive and and being able to do that. Next was the construction company. And while I was at Envirocon, they had an issue at the construction company, and I was a public company. So I became the controller of a public company. It was my first exposure to a public company. And I wouldn't have even brought this up, but Diamond Lake Dam that you hear about now, that's filling up in California, that's finally been filled up. That was one of my first jobs. And so we built that dam. It was a $1.9 billion project. We moved, we put in 4 miles of material and 150 million cubic yards. And so when you think about that, coming from Montana, all of a sudden I was thrown on this huge team with these people from Kiewit. We bought one of the largest equipment spreads in the entire United States at the time, and I had to get up to speed really quick. And that was my exposure to doing that. But once again, I was traveling in California, Vegas, Yellowstone Park, all different kinds of places. And then we were going to move all the offices to California. And I was not moving to California. And it wasn't because I didn't want to move from Montana. It was because I knew the CFO wasn't going to survive. And it was somebody I just couldn't work for. Our values did not work. But, they said, will you go down and move everybody to San Bernardino before you leave? And it's a moment in time where you think about, boy, I've really been dealt some crappy cards here. That, the easiest thing is to leave, get your resume, go do something else and go. And what ended up happening is I did move down there. I moved to San Bernardino. I rented an apartment, and I started to move everybody down to San Bernardino, knowing that I was going to be out of a job. And so that was the first time I really knew that I was going to be out of a job. In the middle of that, they decided to buy Morrison Knudsen. Which was a massive company. I ended up being on the due diligence team of that, and moved to Cleveland for a while, and was doing the due diligence in Cleveland. And then what happened is they wanted to move everybody to Boise. So everybody that's preparing to move to San Bernardino was now moving to Boise for the same reason I was not moving to Boise. But through all that, the experience I got and the things that happened were pretty incredible. And then the time came that closed. I'm unemployed again. So I'm at a juncture where it's not going to work and I've got to start looking for a job. And the CEO calls me in his office and he said, I got one more favor to ask of you. He said, we have a rock and sand pit in Las Vegas that's doing terrible. We need you to go down there and run a rock and sand pit. So remember, I'm a CPA and they want me to run a rock and sand pit in Las Vegas. And I said, I don't know shit about rock and sand. And he said, well, neither does anybody else. That's why you're going. And so I ended up going down there and it was one of the most harrowing experiences of my life doing that, and spent a lot of time. That's for another day. But the new manager came and I was done. So I was done with the construction company and about ready to look for another job. And there was a trucking company in the Washington companies. It was a heavy haul trucking company called Westran. And shoot, I'm not keeping up on my slides. Sorry about that. So this was the construction companies. So I was asked to do Westran. And remember, the company had gone public. And so now we had a private trucking company servicing a public company. And so our largest customer was gone. So for 4 years, I spent running Westran. So I was the president of Westran. And I put these pictures in here because this wasn't just a normal trucking company. This was the big heavy haul stuff that we were doing. It was a remarkable experience. I was incredibly young. I was, not ready for the job. And this is way before cell phones. This is way before GPS. I had no idea where my trucks were. We had $200-some thousand trucks pulling in the lot with the guy leaving, hoping that he's going to come back next week. And so it was an unbelievable experience working there. But like I said, at EnviroCon, when we hired the controller and he stayed on, well, in this one, when they removed the president, he stayed on as the vice president for me. So that was another great experience on how to handle adversity with that. But with Westran, what happened? I learned a lot about just listening. One of the first things I did is said, this is not going to work. You guys look terrible. We're going to get new hats. We're going to get new shirts. We're going to get you guys all outfitted with stuff that looks good. Well, none of them wore any of them. The hats didn't have meshing in the back, and the shirts didn't have pockets for their cigarettes. And so everything went out the window. The other part of it was urgency. And when I talk about no cell phones, when one of your trucks is down on Labor Day in Oklahoma and they don't know how to get home, you can't say, oh, I'll get back to you on Tuesday when I get back to the office. And to this day, that urgency that I was taught at Westran is something that is just seared into my brain. And the other part of it was, I was working that was my first job as a president, and a big part of the compensation was incentives. And I didn't get any of my incentives. We didn't even come close on profitability. And it was one of those things that, was I treated unfairly? Yeah. Could I have gone somewhere else and made more money? Yeah. Why'd I stick around? I mean, there was a whole bunch of people there that I was committed to that were relying on me to do it. And so, we stuck around and I learned a lot from being there. We ended up closing down the company. I auctioned off everything right before the market went down. We were able to pay severance to everybody in the company. And it was a horrible experience. It's a horrible experience laying off that many people. But I think at the end of the day, it was done right. And I think one of the most gratifying things that happened that was incredibly unfortunate is one of the former management team people from Westran passed away, and his wife asked if I would do the funeral for him. And so when you think about, how to treat people along the way on these, it's something that I learned a lot about doing it. Okay. That's the experience part. That's all the failures that get you to get you to that point. So I could say technically, probably, this is where I entered the transfer portal. So I was out and available, and I was starting to look, and this is where mentors come in. And while I was doing all that and doing all those things, there were a couple people, and Terry Payne is one of them who's in the crowd, that said, hold on, you know, we might want to talk a little bit more about this. And at the time, the construction company ended up being in bankruptcy. The mine in Butte was closed, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We had a railroad in the Midwest that was in default, and there was a lot going on in the company. Terry and a guy by the name of David Batchelder had the foresight to talk to Dennis and say, listen, we need to make a change. And when a lot of companies, when we talk now, and we have it at the Washington company, succession planning, all the different things that go along with it, there was none of that. And so when the time came, they said, we need to make a change. Otherwise, we're going to have more troubles. And Dennis said, well, who are we going to have do it? And there was this 39-year-old guy that Terry had thought enough of me to take a gamble. And so he took a gamble, and that's how I ended up being the CEO. So it was quite the experience, you know, being able to do that. So on September 10th, 2001, I went up to the ranch in Missoula and had a discussion with Dennis, and he asked if I can do this. And I said, yeah. And so I started September 10th, and then September 11th, 2001, we all know what happened, but it was a date that I'll never forget for a lot of different reasons. When I talk about the Washington companies and what I had oversight over, here's a diagram of all the different things we were involved in. And I think for all of you in Dr. Finkel's class, I think that this is kind of a mini Berkshire Hathaway. And so there's leaders of each one of these companies that are presidents. I was typically chairman of the board, but I had oversight over all of them. And so it was quite a task to be able to do this, and it was quite an exciting thing to do. And what we're going to touch on the entrepreneurial spirit of each one of these. I know this isn't technically the definition of an entrepreneur, but I'll let you decide when we're done. So I'm going to talk about 5 different companies. One of them is Montana Resources, which is a historic copper mine that was restarted. And the second one is Montana Rail Link, which is a railroad. Both of those are old businesses that when I think about and I look at you thinking about jobs in tech, jobs in climate, those types of things, why would these even be relevant? But I think what you're going to find is there's a lot of opportunity in these that are sitting out there because they're going to be around for a long time. The Winglet Company Aviation Partners, which I think is just fun to talk about. And then one failed one. We had a diamond mine in the Arctic. And I think that that's always important to look at. And then Atlas Corp, which Joe mentioned, which I'm still a director on, but we'll talk about how that happened. I'm not going to talk about what these companies are. What I want to talk about is what that opportunity was and how you saw it and where it was when people walked by it. This one, though, takes a little bit of a setup. So Butte, Montana, and I don't know how many of you know the history of Butte, Montana, but has an incredibly rich history. My friend Michael Punk wrote a book about it, and it's very well done. But he also is not as famous for that book as this book called The Revenant that Leonardo DiCaprio made famous for him. So he's got a book about Butte that I think is just as good as The Revenant. But underground mining starts in 1881. So when I talk about underground mining, these are underground mines for copper that started in Butte. Butte had 100,000 people in the 1880s. It was the largest town between Seattle and Minneapolis. And when I talk about Montana Resources, we're talking about the exact same mine. So this thing has been around for a long time. It was the birthplace, and this is important, it was the birthplace of mine workers #1. And so this was the first union for the mines, was in Butte. And it stuck around for a long time. It wasn't until the 1980s that Butte even got a McDonald's, because they wouldn't allow non-union companies in Butte. The antics of the Anaconda Copper Company and Standard Oil with the stock going back and forth, and the Rockefellers. There's that during that time period, the Securities and Exchange Commission comes about because of the antics that they were doing with the mines in Butte. Fast forward 100 years, 1977, Atlantic Richfield sells, or Anaconda Company sells to Atlantic Richfield. Atlantic Richfield's an oil company and they want to diversify. For context, copper selling for just under $4 today. At that time, it was 54 cents a pound. And so they buy the mine, and less than 5 years later in 1982, they have to shut it down. And so they shut down the mine. And what that means is the Berkeley pit that you hear about, that's all underground mine. And so they had to pump water out of there to keep the mine ready to mine. And when they left, they turned the pumps off and it flooded. So it completely flooded the mine and it completely shut down the town. The entire town of Butte was on its back when they did it. When they shut down, there were 1,300 employees at the mine, represented by 18 different unions. And so, you know, it all of a sudden becomes the largest EPA site in America. So why would anybody be interested in this? Well, remember, Dennis is a mining contractor. And so he's doing road construction and mining. And so what he's interested in is the equipment. And so he goes in and says, I'll take the equipment and I'll take the property for $7 million. And so he made an offer and was able to buy the property for $7 million. But the EPA and the state of Montana said, wait a minute, we're not going to allow you to have this mine. I mean, for $7 million, we got a whole bunch of liabilities here and you don't have the money and the ability to pay for them. So British Petroleum, so Atlantic Richfield ultimately becomes British Petroleum. British Petroleum, you're still on the hook. So Dennis gets this mine with no environmental liabilities because British Petroleum has it, and he's going to salvage the equipment. It's a low-grade copper mine. Thankfully, it's got molybdenum in it, but that's where it stands when he meets a guy named Frank Gardner. And Frank was a former ARCO employee, and Frank said, "I got an idea. Remember, we got all the unions that are in the mine." He said, "Let's run it union free, and let's try to do it union free. And the way we're going to make this work is we're going to give the employees 10% of the profits. So when copper's at $4, they make a lot of money. When copper's at $2, they make a great wage, but it's not as great as $4. And we're going to install entrepreneurship into every person in the mine." Now, who would have ever thought of that, especially in the birthplace of mine workers #1? And so they were able to reopen the mine and open it successfully. I mean, it was brilliant. When you run a mine, there's a lot of costs associated with it. And one of the fixed costs is labor. And so what happens all around the world is when the price of a commodity comes down and you can't move your labor, then you're out of business quickly. And in copper mining, the longer you can stay alive, the better off you're going to be because there's going to be a rebound. And what happened is the employees got that. Remember, it would have never worked if the entire city wasn't on their back from what had happened before. But they were allowed to reopen. So they reopened the mine successfully. 5 years later, Asarco, who at the time is the mightiest mightiest mining company in the world, says, we want to buy that mine and buy part of it. So if you want to hear more about that, you have to go to Kevin McQuilkin's class. What, 426? Is that what it is? Yeah. So that's a whole different class. But they bought 49.9% of the mine for $100 million 5 years later. Remember, he paid $7 million for it. But they insisted that they wanted to be able to get control of this. And so what they said is for every $100,000 that is not contributed to a capital call, they're going to dilute you by 1%. So essentially, if they get into trouble, Dennis doesn't put up $100,000, it's done because the 1% puts them in control of the mine. So reluctantly agreed to it. And in 1999, Asarco was sold to Grupo Mexico. So the mine one's great for 15 years, partners, the Sarco's the partner in it. Interesting things start to happen. I mean, management is under a microscope, right? Because the workers don't want anybody wasting money. I mean, 10% of everything you waste is in our paycheck. And so it's a really interesting model that had not been used in the mining industry, that really worked well. However, in 2000, power prices went up, and power prices went from $1 million a month to 12 million. And so it completely shut down the mine. The mine was shut down. Price of copper was 84 cents. And what happened at that point is it triggered all the environmental liabilities. So now you needed a wastewater treatment plant on site. We had to build a wastewater treatment plant, and we were in suspension. So Sarco, we need your 49.9%, and they refused to pay. And so let's go back to the clause that I talked about. Remember, 100,000 for every 1%. It worked reverse. And so what we did during the suspension is we bought back the entire mine for 4.99 million. So bought it for 7, sold it for 100, bought it back for 4.99 million. Now, at the time, we weren't sure that was a great deal. I mean, we owned 100% of a mine that still was on the largest Superfund site in the United States. Weren't quite sure whether that made a whole bunch of sense. But we got ready to open, went down to Florida, got Frank Gardner out of retirement, came back, and we restarted the mine, and it continues to run today. And I think that when we talk about entrepreneurship and we talk about, how these things work and how these opportunities work, I think one of the best stories about reopening the mine was we had the state of Montana, we had the city of Butte, we had everybody in our group ready to reopen the mine. The transformers were built, we're ready to go. All we needed was a thumbs up from Dennis. And this was not an easy decision. I mean, copper's only at 84 cents. I mean, it's not a home run. I mean, we could end up with a mess. And so what comes into your mind? A PowerPoint presentation in a boardroom with a bunch of spreadsheets and all those types of things? Not even close. Dennis was building a yacht in Vancouver that was all torn apart. I fly up there. Everybody is waiting for me to press the button to go. And I show up and he's like, let's take a tour. And so I was on a tour of the entire thing, just anxious to sit down and talk to him about it. And we finally got in a room that was all destroyed, and there was a lamp hanging from the top. And he said, now, what are you here to talk about? So we want to reopen the mine. And so we went through it and got the thumbs up, and I was able to tell everybody. The interesting thing about the mine, today it produces 80 million pounds of copper, 7 million pounds of molybdenum. When Dennis bought it in 1985, they figured that there was a 30-year mine life left, that they would be closing it. So if you do the math, we should have been closing it in 2015. Through technology, through all the different things that we've been working on, today there's another at least 30 years left on the mine. And so there's a lot of lessons in Montana resources. So it's one of those things. I think it's just a fascinating story. Now, the rest of them don't need that much of a setup, but we'll go through those anyhow. So this is Burlington Northern's network. Burlington Northern, as many of you know, is owned by Berkshire Hathaway. This is their network. If you notice, there's one piece in the middle here, where that red is, that's missing. Why would Burlington Northern not have that piece in their network? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever when you look at a map. Well, in the 80s, at about the same time the mine was bought, Burlington Northern was having a horrible time in Montana doing business. Through decades and almost a century of union agreements, what ended up happening is that there's a 20-mile stretch outside of Helena that people got 2.5 days pay for that one stretch when they would take that. There's a lot of really archaic things in there. The environmental issues, they couldn't get a leg up on that. The regulatory, there's a whole bunch of things going on in Montana. And so they needed a solution to mitigate it. And so they came to Dennis and said, hey, what we'd like to do is sell you this, but we got to keep control of it. If you look, all the trains coming in from the east are going to pick up a train and take it across and hand it off to another Burlington Northern crew on the other side. And so that's going to be incredibly difficult. And so what they settled on was a 60-year lease. That's what they decided to do, was a 60-year lease with an option for Montana Rail Link to buy at the end. That's the way they got federal approval to do it. So what do you do about the unions, right? You've got a union Burlington Northern crew handing it off to a crew for Montana Rail Link, and it's got to hand it off to another Burlington Northern crew. It doesn't work. So what they said is, one union, you guys figure out which union. It was the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. And so the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers is the union for Montana Rail Link. And guess what other little piece of compensation there is in there? Profit sharing. Now, it's not exactly the same as Montana Resources, but there is a piece of profit sharing in there. And what it does is between the union and management, they all of a sudden become a team. And the workers are out there looking for things to improve because they know that they get a piece of the improvements that happen along the way. And it's worked incredibly well. Montana Rail Link is the largest Class 2 railroad in the United States. There's 900 miles of rail with 1,200 employees. But the more important thing is the union agreement that was able to happen. This is the 900 miles. But what they were able to do is put things into the railroad industry that hadn't been there before. Cabooses no longer on the end of trains, Montana Rail Link. Remote control switching in yards, Montana Rail Link. And they've consistently been one of the most efficient railroads in the United States. And it's been an incredible asset for the Washington companies. And it's been a something that's, a lot of people stepped over the opportunity to do something here when Burlington Northern needed it. So fast forward to 2019, all of a sudden we're 32 years into this deal, and I'm starting to buy 30-year rail, and the lease is going to come up in 28 years. So we got a problem, right? At some point, I got to figure out how I'm going to get these 30-year assets out of a 28-year deal. And the discussion starts with Greg Abel at Burlington Northern. Greg's at Berkshire Hathaway, but Burlington Northern owns it. It says, hey, we got a problem here. We got to start talking about it. So in 2021, just exactly what you read about Berkshire Hathaway, Greg and I sat down in October, and in December, we closed a deal to terminate the lease with Burlington Northern. And so Burlington Northern owns Montana Rail Link now. It's just approved by the FRA. And all the employees were kept. Greg saw in Montana Rail Link that there's things that they're doing that help everybody in the industry. And so it's turned out to be an incredible story that's come full circle to now that map is back to whole the way that it should be. And that just happened within the last month. Okay, winglets. So this is an incredibly interesting story, I think, about how this is the next Uber, right? These are those ideas that how did that ever happen? So Dennis owned a Gulfstream 2, and he was in the tarmac on Seattle, and there's a Gulfstream 4 next to him. The Gulfstream 4 looked exactly like the Gulfstream 2, that cost twice as much, 4 times as much. And so he asked a friend of his, hey, do you know anybody that can put those wingtips on my plane that look like that G4? And he said, yeah, I think we do. We know a guy named Dr. Bernie Grotzer. Dr. Bernie Grotzer was the head of Aero at Boeing, and he had developed a patent for a wingtip device. And he'd flown it in a wind tunnel, but it never worked. And he said the only way you can do it is to test fly it. And test flying is incredibly expensive. You got to gut the entire inside of the airplane. It's dangerous. There's all kinds of things that go with it. And so when Dr. Grotzer left, they said, what are you going to do? He said, what are you going to do with that patent? They said, we don't have any need for it. It's yours. So Bernie took the patent with it. And so he told Dennis, all I need to do is test this thing. And so if you'll let me use the G2, we'll gut it. We'll put the wingtips on and see if they work. And I'll be damned if they didn't work. And so that was the birth of Aviation Partners, Inc. And, you know, in your classes, you talk about pricing and markets and all those different types of things. And there's spreadsheets to come up with what your pricing should be. There is no pricing model for these things. There is now, there wasn't at the time. And so Joe Clark, who founded the company, he had paid $252,000 for his first Cessna. And so that was the price of our first wing. It's $252,000. And so that's where it started. That's how we got it. Now that it works on private jets, we got to get Boeing to take a look at it because we know it works on Boeing jets. And Boeing wouldn't talk to us. It was not invented here. They weren't going to be able to do it. But in 1997, there's a guy named Borgy Borskoff who was running the Boeing business jet, which is a 737 that is converted to private use. So convinced Borgy to do it on a BBJ. And so we flew a BBJ full of instruments and confirmed that it worked. And so today you'll see it on all the aircraft, primarily 737 and 757s. But we had a joint venture with Boeing. The joint venture exists today, and it's fascinating. It's 55% Aviation Partners, Inc. It's 45% Boeing. And when you go in to buy a Boeing 737, they'll say, yeah, we could sell you the plane, but if you want winglets, you got to go talk to Larry. Not me, but somebody, you know, so they'll, so that you have to buy the winglets separately. Today, they're on over 9,000 jets. They've saved billions of gallons. There's a counter on there that tells you how many gallons it saved, and reduced CO2 emissions by 135 million tons of CO2 emissions from aircraft just on these winglets. What happens is it reshapes the airflow. And so you get 6 to 8% efficiency from having these winglets on the end of your, on the tips of your wings. And so by doing that, they have the ability to, you have the ability to price them by fuel prices. So when fuel prices go up, then these things sell for a lot more than when fuel prices go down. And so that's why they're on all the aircraft. The beauty of this, I think, is that this was a great design and it worked really well and got installed. Then Bernie came up with something even better called the ventral strake and the scimitar tip. So that little tip on the top is the scimitar tip. That gives you another 0.5%. The ventral strake on the bottom is 1.5%. And so we took off all the old ones and resold them new ones. So we got them twice on this deal. So yeah. So let's talk about one that failed. So remember the mine story and how we started with a 30-year life and ran it for 30 years. Now we got 30 years more. Well, that was Dominion Diamond, right? We came across this opportunity called Dominion Diamond, and it was an opportunity to mine diamonds in the Arctic. At the time, the diamond market was down, and it made a lot of sense to do it. It was 2017. It was a company called Dominion Diamond. It was in the Northwest Territories. Now, to give you a perspective, the Northwest Territories is 45,000 people. That's all in the entire Northwest Territories. It was a fly-in, fly-out camp. We flew the workers in every month and flew them back out. And then there was diamond processing that was all over the world. They left the mine, they went to India, they went to retail after that. For all the spreadsheets, when you looked at this, and there's lots of investment banker spreadsheets that went along with this analysis, we were buying it for 1.7 times EBITDA, which is a steal when you think about it. And our idea was similar to what we had at Butte. We thought we could do a Butte, we can do it in the Arctic. It was remarkable. I mean, the experience, the ice roads, the ice road truckers that you remember, that's these diamond mines. And so I drove that. While I was there, we found a 552 carat yellow diamond. It was the largest diamond ever found in North America. I mean, the excitement just in the office and the things going around. was pretty incredible as we found that. So what happened? Well, three things happened. One of them we never anticipated, which is this thing called a pandemic. Pandemic shut down everything. Now, you think about what a pandemic can do to a lot of businesses. This is a fly in, fly out camp. We're putting people on a plane. We couldn't get people to the place to get on the plane to get to the camp. Other part of it were villagers. And these were really small villages. And we did not want to take the risk of getting somebody infected at the mine site and send them back to a village that has no medical care. And so we shut down the mine immediately. India was completely closed. So even if we were producing diamonds, we couldn't sell them. So we would have to cash flow the entire thing while we were waiting. And we ultimately found out we had a poor leader up there as well. But it didn't work. And so it was sold. It was just sold again. But it was one of those ones that, boy, all the data, if we were to go through the data this evening, it sure looked like a good deal at the time, but we didn't predict this thing called the pandemic and things that happened along the way. The final one I want to talk about is one that I'm still involved with called Atlas Corp. And so Atlas Corp, I'll tell you a little bit more about it, but first let me tell you how it happened. So we have a tug and barge company in Vancouver, and the tug and barge company and the shipyards do most of the tug and barging in the Vancouver Harbor and in British Columbia. There's a guy named Jerry Wang from China, and Jerry came to British Columbia with his wife. His wife was going to University of British Columbia for a master's degree in business. Jerry was a graduate of the Chinese Maritime Academy and also London School of Economics. He didn't have a job, and his wife was going to school. And so we hired him to be a broker, and he was brokering ships for us in the office, which is a pretty administrative task. Kyle Washington, Dennis's son, befriended him, and at a point, Jerry came and said, "Hey, listen, my friend who I was at the Maritime Academy with happens to be in charge of Costco now in China, and they're just getting started, and they need 5 ships, and they don't have enough capital to do it. Would we be willing to build 5 ships and lease it to them?" And so after a lot of hand wringing, we ended up doing it, and we ended up leasing 5 ships, and the rest is history. Today, we're the largest container ship lessor in the world. We have 200 ships. We ship 200. We ship 2 million boxes on our ships at any given time. During the pandemic, we were able to double down, and we have 60 ships in construction. So we have more ships than anybody being constructed in China and Korea right now to add to the fleet. To give you a perspective on these, when we have one of our ships, 24,000 trailer equivalent units, TEU, a 24,000 TEU ship, the freight that's on that ship is 91 miles of freight when you put it box to box in. So these can't come into Los Angeles because there's not 90 unit trains waiting to take it off. And so they're massive ships. They're 1,300 feet, 4 football fields. They'd be the 8th largest building in the United States if they were stood on their end. And they're pretty incredible. We did an IPO. So it was a private company. Jerry and his partner needed some liquidity. And so in 2008, we did an IPO, and things were going fine. And then in 2008, during the financial crisis, the company was on its back, and we had this opportunity to get them whole again, or get them healthy again. And thankfully, Warren Buffett was working with Berkshire, or was working with Goldman and a lot of different people, and gave us the recipe. And so we did a $200 million preferred offering at 12% to the company, and ended up getting a massive amount of the company during that process back through that preferred that we did in the financial crisis. So fast forward to April 2017, the company's struggling again, and they bring in David Sokol to be the chairman of the board, and I come in with David. And for the last 5 years, David and I have been on that board, and it's been a remarkable run. It was $5.44 a share when we started. We just sold it last week for $15.50, and there was dividends all along the way. But the thing I want to talk about in Atlas, this kind of end with Atlas is you think about all the different disciplines that you're going into. One of the things that we're spending a lot of time at our board meetings on is this program that we internally call Chase the Molecule. And Chase the Molecule is looking for alternative fuels for ships. And so we're talking about everything: green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, ammonia, every different kind of alternative fuel we are internally looking at. And so as you think about all the different opportunities out there, I mean, having this as your laboratory to understand what fuel use is going to look like in the future is pretty incredible to me. And so that was one of the points of tonight, is to hopefully just expand your thinking on what opportunities there are out there and what it might look like, and think about some of these old industries that are out there. So that's so okay. So let's come back. And I did not expect worrying about an accident, but that was the answer. So I worried about safety every night that I went to bed. We are in incredibly dangerous businesses, and it never got lost on me that people were relying on me to make the right decisions to keep their loved ones safe. And so we had in the company, every accident that happened, I got called about. I knew every accident that happened. I knew there was a plan to restore it and get something done separately. The other one was people. And when I think about people, it wasn't just people. There was a specific person or a specific thing that was happening, somebody that was underperforming, somebody that was, we were going to have a problem with the next day, or the excitement of chasing a star. I mean, that was an incredibly fun part of the job. I remember when we were hiring a CEO for the aviation partners, we had to get them through all the partners. We had to get somebody through. We had to make sure that if this guy didn't like it, that this lady did like him. And so Boeing had to interview him. Joe had to, and there was a lot of players that would have never made it through the gauntlet. And when we finally hired the CEO, I was so excited. And Terry was the one right by my side with that. I bought Terry a pair of binoculars for being with me on the safari to get this guy. And so it was one of those experiences that you never forget. But people was the other one. And then the other part of it was just long-term, how do we stay relevant 10 years from now? I don't really care too much about the next year, the next quarter. It was more about 10 years from now. How is that copper mine going to continue to run? And how is the railroad, what should we be thinking about on the railroad? And so I think those were the main things that we were thinking about. But safety was the main answer, and safety was the thing that I thought about all the time. I can still immediately judge a company by their safety record. When we got started, the safety record was unacceptable. Now we got twice as many hours as it was in 2000, and we have less than half of the accidents that we had before. So that's it. So I talked the whole time, so sorry about that. But let me open it up for questions, and the rest of the time is yours. So up to you. Okay. Well, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Larry. That was it's a great journey that we shared with you, and you've had a tremendous career. We got a lot of students in the room, and we're always asking how our Gonzaga grads can set themselves apart as they enter industry. And we talked about your entrepreneurial skills you shared, but you also mentioned a couple of times the importance of leadership. And as a matter of fact, you even mentioned the failure of leadership at your mine. What would you say as a CEO, or maybe the three most important leadership characteristics that you would look for that these students could think about as they enter the workforce?
So the question is, three key leadership skills or attributes to think about as you enter the workforce. I think just connecting with people is number one. I mean, having the ability to communicate and connect and empathize and there's a whole bunch of words that I can use, but I think that part of it is important. The second part is details and attention to detail, because attention to detail just comes back to haunt every one of these deals in here. There's some attention to detail that either got missed in the failures or that we saw that nobody else did. I'll tell you a quick story about attention to detail, and then I'll get to the third one. I was just talking about the take private deal we just did on Atlas Corp. Atlas Corp has $4.5 billion in equity and 300 million of outstanding shares. David Sokol's the chairman. We've been working on this since August. And he called me last Saturday and said, hey, listen, I just started looking at this, and I think that if we take the decimal points out on the percentage of ownerships, 3 more decimal points, that the share count is a little bit different than what we have in there for the 4 partners. And sure enough, it was. It's $200,000 in a $4.5 billion deal that everybody looked over. But the fact of the matter is, you want to get it right. And just moving those decimal points in the final hour on something we've been working over for 6 months, it was just a remarkable reminder to me that how important attention to detail is. And then the other thing I think is just urgency. Anymore, I mean, following up on a call, following up on an email, I mean, all the different things that happen. If you're not there, and if you're not in somebody's face with urgency, you're quickly forgotten about and moved on to the next thing. So I think that's part of it. But when I'm not sure how to put this, but we just had an event with the colleagues that I used to work for. And one of the compliments I think that's worth sharing is just that, there was a plaque that they put at the bottom, and they said, you reminded us to lead with integrity, character, and purpose. And I think those 3 things, I think, are incredibly important. Okay. They were all unique. Every one of them was unique, and every one of them had something that was different. And so, we wanted good cash flowing companies that took lots of capital, that there wasn't a lot of competition for. I mean, that's how we got to Dominion Diamond, was that there was just nobody else out there to do that. So we rarely got into auctions.
Hello. So there's been an insurgence of people in the recent generations, or people waking up, of talking about their mental health and prioritizing. But you have certainly gone through some rough patches. What sustained you to keep going, to keep getting back up and keep trying? Because I feel like some of those situations, losing tons of money, having to close down, accidents happening all the time. I mean, I'd be overwhelmed with all that. So I just want to know your thoughts and what you went through.
Okay. So, thank you. That's a great question. And we could be here all night talking about that, but let me just give you 2 things. One of them is, and I've touched on it a number of times, is mentors. And so, having that person, Terry Payne, that I can call and say at any time and say, you won't believe what just happened. And I don't know how I'm going to solve this. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but you have to have an outlet to be able to do that. And it's somebody you trust implicitly. It's somebody that you understand and is there for you and has your back. I mean, that is the only way that I got through, a lot of these situations, is having someone like Terry to call and talk to. The second thing is, and I didn't realize this till later, and in fact, when I was preparing for this, that not forgetting about those early issues that I dealt with that built up to all of a sudden having billions of dollars at stake. That every small issue that I figured out how to solve, that decision, that's why I brought the decision on the speakerphone at Envirocon, is I had to make a decision at that moment. And so that little bit of confidence that I got on that small project that we lost just helps give you confidence for the next one that you have to do. And so I think they all kind of build on each other and have the ability to build on, the smaller ones, just continue to build so that you have that much more confidence on the big one. That answer your question? Yeah.
This works, but how did you like time manage all of that? Do you have any tips for that? It was kind of broad, but
Well, so yeah, I do. I mean, the first thing is hire great people, right? I mean, that's what happened, and let them run their business. If I had to run all those businesses, there's no way you could do it. So that was the main thing, is to hire the right people to do it. But I was telling somebody earlier that, when I first started, Dennis said, you got to communicate with me. I don't know who you are. So I need you to send me a report every Monday. And so for 21 years, every Friday, I sent him a report that said, hey, here's what's going on in the companies, one page that you need to know what's going on. And for me, it was one of those exercises that was incredibly helpful for me to understand what was going on in business, reprioritize what's important. So before the weekend started, I knew what was important and what wasn't important. And it took time, but it didn't take a lot of time to do that. And then the other part of it is outside, finding something you love and finding something you like to do. I love to fly fish. And one of the things that I figured out during this is I really didn't have the time to go out on my own, get my boat ready, get everything ready to go. And so what I started to do is fishing with guides every once in a while with friends, and we'd have a guide. And leadership comes from a lot of different places, but one of the places that I found a lot of leadership was in fishing guides. And it sounds silly, but if you go spend a day with a fishing guide, I'll tell you, there's not one accountant in this room that when they're done doing accounting during the week, that they're going to go in the weekend and do accounting. Fishing guides are going to go fishing on their days off. So when you talk about passion and you talk about loving your job and loving your work, getting out on a river with a fishing guide, you come back with a whole different attitude. Understanding that there are people that, really love every minute of every day that they do. And, finding those types of things, I think has been incredibly helpful. That's it? Okay, you bet.
I got it. So I am also a CPA, graduate of Gonzaga in 2012. And so the early part of your career, I relate to a lot because I felt like, I was into auditing for a while as well. And so I'm just curious, how did you make the transition of, being in that CPA auditor mindset of looking backwards as you do in accounting to looking forward and forecasting, I am managing this company for the future. And how do you, I guess, the question is, how do you make that transition from looking backwards to looking forwards and thinking strategically in a forward-facing manner?
That's a great question. I've really never thought about, if there was a moment in time where that's happened. But I think, if I go back to one of the things I talked about was, taking advantage of every opportunity I got in front of me. And so, when I was running the rock and sand pit in Las Vegas, looking backward with my accounting auditing mindset was never going to work. Right. And so I think just by brute force, I ended up getting myself in situations and in opportunities to the point where, you had to start looking forward. And I think surrounding yourself with people that are looking forward, that are helping you look forward, I think is a big part of it as well. But that requires some more thought. I don't know exactly when that happened, but that's a good question. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so the question is, as you look forward and look into the future, what types of things do you see that are relevant to be thinking that way? Um, you know, Surrounding yourself with people, I think that that you can have those discussions with and think about them. I'm not the guy that's going to tell you what's going to happen with copper prices in the future, right? And so as I think about that, I'm not sure that that's something that would be helpful for me. I will tell you the most important thing in these businesses I talked about, whether it was the winglet business, the mine, the railroad, is to be the low cost producer. Because at some point, if you're not the low cost producer, your customers are going to switch to somebody else. And so trying to figure out how to maintain efficiency and be the low cost producer. And I'll give you a good example. As we think about mining going forward, what does mining look going forward? How many of you, when you get out of college, want to drive a mining truck? Nobody? Yeah, nobody wants to drive a mining truck. And so even though those are relevant jobs today, they're having a hell of a time finding people that drive a mining truck all day long. It's a 24/7, 365-day mine. So what do? In the process of putting a net over the top of the mine, an electronic net over the top of the mine, and we're going to automate the trucks. And so the trucks are going to be run automated with an electronic net over the top of the mine to stay relevant. And so that's a, how do you keep relevant? Did I think of that on my own? Hell no. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people talking about that and being relevant. And I think, having conversations with the right people, just opens it up, and reading a lot. I think that there's a lot of good information and books that are out there on them. So.
What is the best career advice you have ever received?
Best career advice I've ever received. Oh, Terry's probably laughing. So I was interviewing Neil Kashkari, and Neil is the president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. And we were doing an interview, I think it was at Montana State University. And he got the question about, if you were to give any advice to a college student, what would it be? And he said, crush your job. Whatever job you're in, crush it, because that's what's important now. That's what people are going to notice. That's what Terry Payne noticed over the years when I had the ability, when ultimately this opportunity came up. But that was the thing, is to crush your job and do the best you can at whatever job you're in. Some of those, and I think, thank you for that question, because it's exactly what I was trying to portray here, that, when Westran, 2 years into that job with no bonuses and, working every single day, it would have been easy to walk away. But, sticking with it, I not only learned a lot, but people noticed. And I think that's the one thing that I think I would say. And it's not original, by the way. I copied that from you.
Work-life balance. That seems to be a kind of catchphrase now with a lot of that people in my son and daughter's life. They hear that, we got to have this work-life balance. How did you balance having a family and traveling so much and being able to keep that family life together too? Did you give your wife that diamond that you showed in?
No, thanks, Mary, but no. No, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of friends and family here that probably better answer that than I can. But I really did kind of lead two different lives. When I was at work, and nobody at work thought I owned any casual clothes because they saw me in suits all the time. And none of our friends knew that I owned a suit because I was never, in that. So I think it goes back to when I was traveling a lot. And we were newly married, we were traveling a lot. When I came home, we had 2 days, and that was it, Saturday and Sunday. And so we traveled, we did all kinds of things with those 2 days and made everything we could out of those 48 hours. And I think once you get in that mode, of that you can shut it down and, enjoy 48 hours doing something. But, having a spouse that supports you is number one. And Warren will attest to that, right, Dr. Finkel? So, that's number one. But aside from that, I mean, being able to, lead two different and find joy in things like fly fit. I mean, when I put on my waders, it's the best pair of clothes that I own because everything sheds off me and I'm ready to go and don't think a thing about work. So finding something like that that's an outlet, I think is helpful. Now, I will tell you, growing up or with the girls growing up, I never missed a tennis tournament or a soccer tournament or all those sorts of things. But I'll tell you, I can't tell you a thing about any of them because I was never present. I was always on my phone. I was thinking about how I was going to solve something at work. I was always thinking about something else. If I had to do it all over again, I mean, that's the one thing I would do is try and figure out how to be present at those types of things. But I was physically there and they appreciated it, but it wasn't one of those things that I really have memories of because I was always thinking of something. Yeah.
Curious, there have been a whole bunch of train derailments in the news recently. And your thoughts about that, what the industry can do to prevent that. And when you look at business opportunities, they always start with a problem. This is a huge problem. Is there an opportunity there for a business?
Did everybody hear that question about, okay. So yeah, that is incredibly unfortunate. And every once in a while there is a wreck like we saw in Ohio. They've gone a long ways to do positive train control. And so to give you an idea of positive train control, it's the computers that are on the trains. Class 1 railroads were required to have positive train control. And they have the ability to manage the depth between the trains and all those types of things. Positive train control, just to give you a perspective, they just started with the Class 2 railroads. So put it in Montana Rail Link, Class 2 railroads, $200 million. And we were starting to do it. It's $200 million with no return. And so the industry has been investing a lot in safety, positive train control. However, what it doesn't handle is rail, right? There's always going to be problems with the rail at some point. And so in the summer, it expands because of the heat. In the winter, it contracts. And there's always something that goes along with rail. And business is only going to get bigger on the railroads. There's going to be more and more of that. So I don't really know. I don't know that regulation is part of it. I think getting technically to where they need to is going to be, technology is going to have to help solve this problem a little bit. In my mind, they've come a long ways, and it's been one of those things that has taken a while to get here, but it's a massive investment. We had to redo all of the stations on there. I mean, poured a ton of concrete, put in stations everywhere to put in positive train control. Now, I do think if there's an industry that ever lends itself to automation, it's railroading, right? We talked about self-driving cars, all those types of things. Railroads on the track, they have the ability to do it, and it has to be monitored. But I do think they'll get there on it at some point. As far as an industry, I don't know. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day that Montana Rail Link just had an interesting derailment by Quinn Hot Springs. All derailments are bad, but one of these cars was full of Coors Light and Blue Moon, and so there's a picture of I was going to pull it up potentially, but there's a picture of a guy fishing that's got his boat pulled up there, taking a Coors Light off the side of the road. So some are better than others, let's put it that way. But that salvage company, when you see what happens on a wreck like this, those guys were on that wreck almost instantly, and they had the ability to do it. And the ability to react to these is pretty incredible when you look at the industry has figured out a way to do it. There was a time when I was there that they put fuselages from Boeing into the river, And what happened is that messed up the entire firing line for Boeing to put those 737s in the line. And so there's a whole bunch to that. Other than just derailments, the hiccups that this causes in the supply chain are massive. And so, yeah, it's something I'm confident they'll figure out. I just don't know when and how, but you're right. I mean, there have been a lot of them recently.
You mentioned staying relevant in the next 10 years. My question is, as a private business, it's easy because we don't answer to shareholders, but you have experience in publicly traded companies, where I think the norm is the next financial statement that goes out to the shareholders has to be X. So it's very short term. So how did you navigate when you're dealing with public companies, having that long-term vision and dealing with shareholders that were expecting returns on quarterly or yearly basis?
So great question. Did everybody hear that on the, okay. So you hit on the exact thesis for why we just took Atlas private. And so, we were, when at Atlas, what we were always looking at is how to stay relevant for a long period of time. And that's why we went just from container ships to an asset manager where we do temporary power as well, and do gas turbines in places like Bangladesh and Mexico and all different kinds of places all over the world. So we were starting to expand that. We looked long term. We didn't really worry about what the market thought at that point, but there was a point where our stock wasn't relevant anymore, and we didn't have the ability to use it to do the things that we needed to, and it was never at the place that we needed to. So we did a discounted cash flow. We've got $18 billion worth of backlog, and it was worth $22 a share. And so just with if you just collect the revenues that we've already got in place. And so that's the point where we said we got to find a partner and go private. And if we can find the right partner, then we have the ability to go private. And so it's not a good answer to what your question is, but that's how we dealt with it, is we took it private because we didn't feel the market was appreciating the business that we had, and that there was more value there than what was actually in the business. So time will tell whether we were right. I mean, it was, at the time, 1550 was what we all agreed to as a price, and we'll see. We'll see what happens long term. But okay. Okay.
I'll
I-
keep it to my one then.
Okay.
So what's next for Larry Simkin?
Great question. So I'm going skiing for the last time next week. I'm on the Atlas on the private board. But like I started out with, I'm really at a point of discernment. I don't quite know what to do next. I'm talking about potentially another public board and some, a few things like that. But for right now, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and yeah, skiing a little bit, fishing, and hopefully getting involved in some other activities. But for right now, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. Mountain. So we hiked a place called the Trilobites in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. So Trilobite Peak is probably the one that's on the top of my mind right now. So thank you.
Thank you for coming in tonight, Larry.
Oh, you bet.
I've got a gift for you. We wouldn't have you come in without a gift. Only AJ knows what's in here.
Uh-oh.
So thank you very much for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
You did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.